Company of Makers. Podcast Talks Workshops.
This podcast is dedicated to those who served during the Battle of the Atlantic throughout World War II. Welcome to Land, Sea and Air. I'm Steve Bomford, co-founder of Company of Makers.
And I'm Mike Davis-Marks, a former Royal Navy submarine captain.
On this episode, I'm talking to Norma Wright, who is the widow of David Wright, who was a CAM pilot. That's C-A-M, CAM. I had no idea what any of this was about.
Well, I have to say, I didn't really understand about CAM or Catapult Aircraft Merchant Ship, which is what CAM stands for, before this interview. So I've done some boffing up on it since. But actually, this is kind of two podcasts for the price of one, Steve, isn't it? Because we get to interview Norma with her son Robin in the background, but also it's also about David, her late husband.
Yes, and it's a fascinating story, isn't it? I think they had an interesting time, might be the best way to describe it, during the Second World War. But enough of me talking about it. Let's hear what she's got to say. Norma, thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Yes, all right.
So, would you like to tell me a little bit about your service during the war?
When the war started, I was 14 and at school.
Wow.
When the war finished, I was 19. I think probably my first memory at school was the year that France was occupied.
Mm.
And our French mistress marched us the day that Paris fell. The French mistress, who was from France, was devastated, and she marched us around the playground singing the Marseillaise. Yes, indeed, that's quite a memory as well.
That sounds like a typically French response.
Yes, indeed, yes. That's one of my earliest memories about the war. And I think we probably had a radio by then, and we would hear the news from time to time. That was all, of course. No other way. My mother got a newspaper, I don't know, once a week.
Mm.
It was more about the fire watching and things like that when I was young that I was interested in. Fire watching services and who along the street was going to do what, who was going to carry the water, who was going to pump the thing for putting out fires. I'm sorry, that all sounds very silly, but these are my memories.
No, it's not silly at all, because it's your memories we want to hear. So was that a specific role you were given, or were you doing this whilst you were at school?
I was not much good at school. I enjoyed art and the things that don't matter. And left when I was 16.
Yeah.
My mother was widowed and she had a shop and she needed help in the shop. Obviously, in retrospect, I should have kept on in some way, but I was glad to leave school. When I was 17, I realised that I was going to have to go in the services. Had it been possible, I would have loved to have gone in the WRENS, the Women's Royal Naval Service.
Mm.
But because my mother needed help at home, if possible, she couldn't get people to help very well. I decided to join the National Fire Service because in that way I could both be doing some more work but also help my mother on my days off.
Yeah. So what was it like in the National Fire Service?
In Keighley near Bradford, it wasn't very, very different. I used to work 12 hours and then 12 hours off or something like that. I can't really remember. But I realised that when I was 17 going into 18, then I should become mobile. And we were sent to a training college at Kirklees for 2 weeks. Some people call it a boot camp, but it was nothing like that. We just marched around Halifax every morning, and then in the afternoon we did lessons. And that was a very interesting time for me. I felt fitter than I'd ever felt before because I'd not been used to marching. Then I think it was the winter 43, 44. I went to another training college in Bradford. Then suddenly we were told that we were going to be mobilised and that we'd have to be ready with our kit bags, everything in it, particular date. That was, I think, during the February 44. We met and we were taken in the National Fire Service lorries to Bradford, and we were put on a train going to London. We didn't know we were going to London, but that's where we finished. A memory there is that probably the train, it was a slow train, I think we were about 12 hours in the train, full of soldiers and sailors and airmen and mouth organs going, and the lavatories blocked and things like that.
Oh, lovely.
But I think it was probably an hour before we arrived at London, and the train stopped for ages, and we could see a big red glow coming from the London area. And then we started again, and we'd be probably going into King's Cross. I hadn't been to London before, and it was very exciting to be driven across London to Victoria Station. Not steam-powered, but electric or something. They were very different. We'd been fed from a canteen van. This would be in the early morning. I finished up with a few others in the Medway towns, Chatham. That's where I was based.
Yep.
My digs were in Gillingham, and I walked into Chatham. And we were there ready for Hitler's last gasp with the fire bombs and I can't remember, the V something rocket.
The doodle bugs, is that what you're talking about?
Well, the doodle bugs, yes, certainly, but also the rockets.
The V2?
Yes, V2 rockets, that's right. Wherever I went, I had my steel helmet on and my gas mask everywhere. And in the station where I was billeted, I was with about 6 other girls that I knew, which was rather good. But my station was different. Walking into Chatham from Gillingham every morning, or whatever duties I was on. Sometimes it was 48 hours on, 24 hours off, and other ways like that. But I caught a bit of sleep under a table many a time. You wanted to get under something like a table in case everything crashed down.
Yeah. So what was life like for you? Because you're still very young at this stage, aren't you? Probably, 18 maybe?
I was, yes, 18. That's right. Everybody talked about the next front, and that's it. The exciting time was on June 6, 1941, when walking to work, I realised that people were talking about what had happened during the night. That was marvellous to hear all that going on.
Are we talking about D-Day here?
D-Day, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you also that about 3 weeks before that, I had visited Brighton. Why? Because I had a boyfriend there from the Cameronians, actually. They'd been in Keighley stationed there for a while, and I got to know him. And I was not supposed to travel at all. The military police were at every station checking all the papers. But because they didn't know the difference in the fire force areas, I got through London and got the train down to Brighton for the day. And at Brighton, I remember all the seafront. There was barbed wire as high as houses nearly all along the front.
Yeah.
And out at sea, I could see that there was some low-cut barges out, and they would be the training for the landing, for the landing crews. Yes, I remember that. And then I was only there a few hours, but I travelled back. I think my boyfriend came on the train with me as far as Haywards Heath, and then I went on to London and back again. But that day was rather memorable because I saw everything being training up for D-Day.
So that must have been a really important time throughout the country. Once people had realised, well, not that particular time, but obviously when D-Day happened, that must have been a monumentous occasion, mustn't it?
Oh, yes, it was. Everyone was thrilled and talking about it, yes. However, I think soon after that, I had to return home. I got compassionate leave to serve in Keighley. My mother was not too well, and so let's see, I had my leaving papers, I think, soon after that.
That was to leave the fire service, was it?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that was really my war. Not very adventurous. But on the other hand, I became used to when I was in Chatham. I just became used to, feeling the ground move under my feet when a V2 rocket would land in London.
Mm.
We're continuously called out with the firebomb damage everywhere. It was quite exciting though, being in Chatham, because it was a naval base, and on our weekends, some of us would go to the Palais de Danse and dance with the sailors. I didn't make any particular boyfriends there, though. No.
Well, I guess in the circumstances, a bit of recreation, a bit of socialising is a very good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I used to like the Palais de Danse. And we had good times as well in our little flat with the 6 of us cleaning up.
Mm.
And we had a wind-up gramophone. We used to play that quite a bit. Oh gosh, it sounds terribly old-fashioned, doesn't it?
Well, it was, to be fair, it was quite a while ago, Norma.
It was quite a long time ago.
Yes.
I was referred to as Miss Oily. My name was Norma Hiley, but it seemed funny to be called Miss Oily.
Why were you called that?
By the other people at the station. I was put on a charge once for being insubordinate as well to the station commander.
Dare I ask what you did?
I was just being rude, I think, to the commander. That was all.
No major infractions then. So we're also going to be talking about your husband-to-be at this time, aren't we?
Yes, indeed. I did know him, but at that time, let's see, what year are we? 43. He was in the Mediterranean for 2 years aboard the aircraft carrier Formidable, almost all of 43. Then I think he was discharged, unfit for flying.
Okay.
We possibly got together again after the war was finished.
Mm.
Yes, that's how it was. And we were married in 46.
So you got married in 1946. So what was your husband's name?
David.
So I believe David was involved in these catapult armed merchantmen, if I've got that right. Is that correct?
He was a camship pilot.
Yeah.
Catapult armed merchantmen.
Yeah.
Fly. And that was pretty much at the beginning of the war.
Can you remember a little bit about what he told you about that experience?
When I knew my husband at first, it was when he was first in the Navy. He was trained in Canada. His first commission was to Belfast, Naval Air Station Belfast. He had no idea what he was going to do. He'd been trained, but even so, it was a surprise to him. and his first ship, Maplin, that's it, Maplin. Well, in fact, during the war years, I had no idea what my husband was doing. I just know that he was going to Belfast. The job he was doing was highly secret. I would see him off at Keighley Station after when he'd been on leave. The 8:38 train to Heysham, the boat train. And then again, if he was home on leave, he would call up the shop, probably take me out for a few days. That was how it was during wartime.
Did he tell you anything about what he was doing, or was that all top secret?
Oh, no, not a word about all that, no.
Okay.
I had no idea. I knew that he was probably flying, and that was it.
Okay. Did he tell you after the war some of the things he did?
Oh, yes.
So with these cam pilot, because he was a cam pilot, wasn't he?
He was a camship pilot.
Yes. So if I'm right, the idea behind these was it was probably a Hurricane that was attached to a merchant ship that was catapulted off.
On one occasion, when he was on duty to fly, and he was in the cockpit already, the lookout said, "Oh, call away." It was something different. So it was not needed for my husband to be shot off, as we say. And afterwards, it was discovered that if they had pressed the button for all the rockets to fly, he would have been burned alive because some catches were not released.
Yes. He mentions that in the book. To be honest,
that is quite dramatic, really.
I must admit, when I first heard about catapult on merchantmen, I don't know why, I just assumed that the sort of catapult system was very similar to, it was on the larger ships of the Royal Navy. I didn't realise they introduced this quite dangerous sounding rocket system. So that must have been quite an experience, being launched off a ship like that.
It was just anything that could help to prevent the dreadful shipping losses. And I understand that it was Churchill's idea to arm some small vessels so that the middle of the Atlantic could be scoured to keep away the Focke-Wulf Hurricane, the Focke-Wulf reconnaissance planes telling the U-boats where the convoys were.
Yeah. So he did quite a number of launches, didn't he? And I was also, that they didn't fit the wheels if they weren't close enough to land.
Oh, yes. That's right. So the pilots would, after combat, have to land in the sea. And if it was a hurricane, they had barely any time before the hurricane would sink.
I was just again surprised that Hawker, the company that made the Hurricane aircraft,
yes,
because it had a radiator underneath, as all aircraft do, have a radiator, but that flooded very quickly. So if they did land, like an aircraft normally lands when they ditched, it was likely to sink even quicker.
Oh, you mean scooping the water?
Yes, that's it.
Yes, that's right. Well, absolutely, but depending on the seas, they could be hopelessly drowned at first, or if they could land somewhere near a pickup, then they had seconds to get out, to shove the hood back, unstrap, and actually get out. And one or two of Robin's friends were in deep water before they could swim to the top.
Crikey.
Yes, I've heard him talk about it.
So did he have to ditch in the sea? And what did he tell you about that?
No, he didn't. David was one of the last people to be in the cam ships, actually. It was his first commission, but it was probably the last few years, few months of the cam ships being used. I seem to think there was one to the Arctic at one point, or halfway. Maybe they had to turn back. Mostly it was midships. Sorry, not midships, mid-Atlantic.
Mid-Atlantic, yes. So I mean, ditching in the middle of the Atlantic would be quite worrying, but also doing it in the Arctic Ocean would be another order of problem, wouldn't it?
Well, I think it would be instant death there, yeah. I think it was just it was a necessary voyage or something, nothing to do with guarding anything.
He also was a bit of a writer, wasn't he? I'm getting the sense from reading this. Obviously, he's written this about his experiences, but didn't he also write poetry and about his experiences as well?
Well, a little doggerel, he would call it, doggerel. Yes.
What, doggerel?
Well, rhyming.
Ah, okay.
Not. I think you could not call it poetry as such. No. After the war, I don't know. Years and years went by, and in retirement, David tried to locate some of the other pilots that he'd known. There were not many of them. I would think maybe 8 at the most. He did locate one who was actually dying. So he decided that, being the only one with the memories and still alive, that he would write as much as he could about the cam ships, which of course he did, and you've read it. Yes.
What did you think about his rhymes, or his other kind of like a short story, I guess, he's written, isn't there, that's included in information that Robin sent me?
About thinking of joining the Fleet Air Arm, yes.
Yeah, because he was expecting to fly off aircraft carriers, wasn't he?
And did.
Yeah,
yes.
Sorry, before he became a cam pilot, sorry, I should explain. Yeah,
yes,
he was expecting to
that's
fly off
right,
aircraft.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that was his first commission, and the second one was about 2 years in the Mediterranean, flying from the aircraft carrier Formidable, and involved in the invasions of North Africa, Malta, the islands, and then Sicily and southern Italy. Yeah.
So he had a very, very busy war, didn't he?
Oh, he did, yes. That would be that was probably finished, though, in 43. Something like that. He and other pilots after that some were decommissioned, I think, quite soon. I believe that he thought of becoming a test pilot, but was turned down, so came back into civil life.
So did he manage to make contact with any of other former comrades from his time during the war?
Yes, that was when he was in Formidable. A friend from Leeds, they both, I believe, wrote the famous or infamous A25, which I believe may be still sung in the Navy, I don't know, in the wardrooms. Yes.
Have I got a copy of that, Robin?
No, I think it's A35 actually, and
sorry.
And the form, if you Google it, I'm pretty sure you'll find it. But if you want a copy, my mother refers to Steve. That was his roommate, I think, on the cabin together on Formidable. And my father played the piano, and there was a piano in the wardroom, and so together they wrote the opening verses. And A35 is a form that you filled in if you prang an aircraft, and the verse went something like. Crikey, I'm alive, but to remember to render the A35.
Yes.
And that was the chorus line. And then there were lots of verses about individuals' experience of what they've done. And some of them, going off the end of the carrier and the carrier nearly rolling over the top of them. But the having written it carried on all the way through the jets. And even Fleet Air and people today still sing it and add verses. So there are many, many verses to it. But my father and Steve are the founders of that.
A25.
Is it 25 or 35? It's
A35, it could be one or the other. Yes, yeah. Not sure.
So that's one of his
yes.
claims to fame is a co-author, a founder author of the A35. Which is the unofficial Royal Navy anthem. I think that's how that's described it. Fleet Air Am, I should say. Fleet Air Am anthem.
So he was very creative, wasn't he?
Yes, in many ways. Another interesting thing I just remembered is that when he was aboard Formidable, and I believe it was an ENSA group, they entertained the troops. They were also on board.
Mm-hmm.
I think important people. And David was playing the piano in the wardroom in the evening, as he did, a few drinks about. he suddenly realised that someone was near the piano and singing with him. And it was Noel Coward. Yes. So he actually played the piano for Noel Coward at one time. And you obviously know the name. Yes.
That's quite a claim to fame, isn't it?
Yes. Another thing is that my daughter was interested in the book. She lives in America.
Mm.
And her husband is connected with PGA Golf. And he was speaking, my son-in-law was speaking to the president, and my daughter was with him. My daughter produced the book that David had written and gave it to the president, who was Barack Obama.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And the connections that my son knew in the White House, later in the day, I think he was the golfing companion for the president. And he said that the president had shown him the book, and he was saying, "I'm going to read that tonight." So that's interesting, maybe, as well.
It is. I think it is, because I think the telling of these stories, whether it's, through a book or like we're doing now, is really, really important, because this is how we remember people, isn't it?
Of course. Yes.
Maybe I should just interject there, Steve, because there's a context of that. Is that when my father was flying in the Med, the Italy and Sicily landings, they were flying under American colours, because the North Africans did not. They did not trust the British if they got captured, but if they were American, they did, and there are reasons to that effect. And so when my sister and brother-in-law my sister wanted something in context to give to Obama, and because he was flying under American colours, she could claim her father flew for the American Air Force. You see, that's the context of why he was interested in
yes.
it, and her opening.
Yes, thank you for explaining. Yes, my son has a better mind than I have. As far as the camships are concerned, I think I've told you that my husband was engaged in probably the last year of the Fleet Air Arm operating the camships. Mm. But some of the friends David was with were involved in the flying, oh dear, I wish I could remember names. The famous aircraft flying out from, I think it was from Formby. The RAF took it over, and they operated something similar for looking out for the aircraft when the convoys were nearing, well, in home waters more. Mm. They flew out from, I think, a naval air station, Formby, somewhere near Formby, yes. Liverpool. Yeah. Liverpool up there, yeah. Oh, goodness. I didn't write the name down. It's such a well-known aircraft. Also sort of took over some of the caring of the convoys.
Oh, you talk about the Seafire?
No, I'm talking. Swordfish. Robin got it. The Swordfish. Yes.
Well done.
It was a biplane manned by pilot, observer, and gunner.
Yes.
And that did all the work that probably the camships could have been doing in home waters. Yes. And that, I think, lasted for years, almost to the end of the war. Mm. And I could be saying something that isn't quite true, but not sure about it, yes.
No, but definitely once they were close enough, they got air cover, didn't they, from shore-based establishments, as you've just said. That's absolutely correct, yeah.
That's right. When the drive was to have most of the Fleet Air Arm in the Mediterranean, then the RAF, I believe, took over in the home waters, rather, yes.
Mm. On the last page of his book, there is a cartoon of a hurricane being launched with the caption, "Don't mind me, I'm only the pilot."
Yes.
How did that come about? Do you know?
The cartoonist was done by a very famous wartime painter and humorist. I know it well. Yes. Don't mind me, I'm only the pilot. Yes.
Yeah.
He did so many humorous drawings during the war.
Robin, would it be possible to find out who that artist is, if you don't know already?
I don't know, actually. That's a new one on me, but my mother, I'm pretty sure my mother will.
I'll have a go. I'll have a go with that. So many people would remember his drawings.
I think the fact that particular humorist had picked up on the cam ships was something, that he could do a cartoon on, because they were fired off by a rocket, whether the pilot knew about it or not. I suppose it was quite possible for them to be fired off by accident. Hence, what my mother talks about, the fact that the chap who was supposed to pull out the securing pins hadn't done so.
Yeah.
And luckily, the aircraft was not a Focke-Wulf; it was something else. It was a friendly aircraft, and so they didn't fire him. But
I think when my husband clambered down from the plane and started asking questions, he was led away from the culprit, or else he would have probably there'd been a fight or something. Yeah.
Well, I imagine he was quite cross, because that's a very dangerous situation, isn't it?
Oh, I should think he was livid, yes.
So I suspect the cartoon has more than just a little bit of element of truth to it in some ways. I wouldn't be surprised if that did happen.
I suppose so, yes.
So is there anything that you would like to add? This is also to you, Robin. I think
there is some relevance. My mother might, if I give her a prompt here.
Yep.
My father was trained in Belfast, what is now Belfast City Airport. I just can't remember what it was called during the war, but that's where he did his training, and that's where he had his first catapult launch, which was actually only using 15 rockets, and it was a Starfish, I think, a lighter aircraft, the first experience before they advanced. But my mother was fundamental in getting the camships pilots remembered, and there is a memorial at that airport, just outside the terminal as you walk towards the car park. It's still there. And my mother unveiled it. And she unveiled it with various dignitaries, including Mary Peters, who has just become the Order of the Garter today. But Mother, do you want to take forward what you can remember out the background of that happening and then actually getting established? After my father died, you took it on, didn't you?
I seem to be the only person who remembered, well, not really, but amongst my friends, right, that remember the camships. And I thought it would be good in that they could be remembered somewhere from the base where they were flying. And so at the same time, it happened to be the 100 years since the formation of the Fleet Air Arm, and I was invited in lieu of my husband. He would have been invited, but as his widow, I was invited to various functions, and one of them was aboard the aircraft carrier Illustrious. I think it's just being broken up now. That's what I heard the other day. Illustrious, and I think that some royalty were there as well. It was a good buffet of people who were invited there, and I think it was Liverpool, yes. And I happened to meet some people from Belfast who were interested as I was, in having a memorial to the camship pilots. They were enjoying building old aircraft. Robin knows the name for people like that.
British aircraft enthusiasts.
And they were quite interested in the project and as well. And they helped me have this memorial done for the camship pilots in Belfast. And we had quite an event that day. And the 702 squadron, the last of the camships, now were heralded by the new 702 helicopters that day, and they did a fly past as we were having the ceremony. The new 702 squadron.
Yeah. When was this roughly?
This was about 10 or 12 years ago.
Well, that's quite a while to mark people's service, isn't it? I'm so glad you've done that. I think that kind of thing is really, really important, that we recognise people's service. Yes,
indeed. Yes, it was a very small part of these brave young men. They went to their first commission. They had no idea, really, what they'd been trained for. And so they are remembered.
Well,
yes.
given what they did, I can understand why they weren't told in some ways, because it seemed like a very, very dangerous occupation.
They were told at the time, yes. When they checked in with the commanding officer, yes. But only then did they know that they were going to be involved in this hazardous business of trying to protect the convoys in mid-Atlantic.
Mm. Well, I'm glad that they did, to be honest. I think we should all be glad that they did.
Oh, yes. Yes. In fact, I believe that the original training, I think, was somewhere in the south of England.
Did he say that was HMS Dryad? I think it's
Oh.
it's down. It's in this neck of the woods. It's near Portsmouth, isn't it? When he did his initial training before he moved up to Liverpool, because he did his initial training on Daedalus, HMS Daedalus.
The name is familiar to me.
Yeah, that's where he did his initial training on the Swordfish, like you said, because the first time he was launched, it was on a Swordfish.
Yes, it was all very new. In fact, I think the first time he flew from Catapults was, oh goodness.
That's Norma. Honestly, don't worry. You've told me more than enough, you and Robin. So you don't need to do any more if you don't want to.
Well, so long as the small effort that the CAM ships made in the war could be remembered somehow, and I'm very glad that I've been able to say at least a few words about it, helped by my son.
Well,
okay.
That is absolutely what we're endeavouring to do, and I just want to say thank you so much for your time and being patient with me.
Well, I'm sure that you may be able to retrieve something of that may be of interest to people.
I'm absolutely certain of it. So once again, I just want to say thank you.
That's all right. Thank you very much. Yes.
It's a pleasure. Robin?
Yes.
The book itself, is this available anywhere on the internet? The reason why I'm asking is that we could include a link in the description of the podcast that we can refer to where people can get a copy of it.
No, is the answer to your question. And so it's not, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be. I have no idea how you go about that.
So in that case, maybe we should have a conversation where we could talk about that, because we might be able to help with that. Yes,
indeed. And I think towards the end of the book, there's some instructions, and I'm pretty sure those instructions are operating instructions about how the aircraft should be handled. And that's a direct result of my father nearly being killed, burned to death, because there wasn't a standard operating procedure. Mother, do you agree? Yes,
indeed, yes. I hadn't thought of that. The book really has just been distributed to a few friends and some of the family so far.
Yeah. Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Yes, that's rather amazing, really.
So it's been read by the family and Barack Obama. I mean, that's a pretty good way to end, isn't it?
Well, yes.
Perfect. And I'd just like to say finally, Norma, thank you so much for doing this. It's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve.
Real pleasure.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
I really like this interview, Steve, partly because Norma's got something to say about herself as much as about her husband. So it really was two podcasts for the price of one.
It really was. And I think it's worth saying here that this actually was recorded over 2 sessions. And the first session was only a couple of weeks after she'd had COVID. And the second one was several weeks later, but she was still struggling with the hangover of COVID. So all power to her.
Well, we call this generation, the age of the people that you're interviewing is largely between 95 and 100. And we call that generation that went through World War I the greatest generation. And she's kind of typifies that, doesn't she?
Absolutely, she does. Remarkable character.
Yeah, no. And and her own story, because we asked her to speak about her late husband, who was this camp pilot, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But her own story is pretty fascinating as well. I mean, she was 14 and at school when war broke out and decided that academics were not for her. She said, I was only good at art and what good is that? I don't necessarily agree with that. Of course, I think that the world needs art and creativity and things like that. But she wanted to join the Wrens, the Women's Royal Naval Service, and she was too young, or they wouldn't let her. So she went and joined the National Fire Service. And I think there's a whole raft. This opens up a whole raft of stories about what women did during World War II, when largely menfolk went to sea or flew or went to war, and the vital jobs they did, like the National Fire Service, 12 hours on, 12 hours on, when their menfolk had left.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, putting fires out was a pretty important thing to be doing.
Yeah, and I think Norma sounds like she was made of pretty strong stuff as well. She talks about being posted down to Chatham, but having to come up to London to put out fires, caused by the V2 rockets, I think, towards when they started sort of coming over. And then finding time to dance with sailors or catch a train to Brighton to meet her boyfriend. Even I think she was quite rebellious, actually, because she also said she was put on a charge for being rude, which immediately endears her to me, I think. And of course, they witnessed D-Day happening and how thrilling that was for all of them. And she'd met her husband at this point, although they weren't married. They didn't get married until after the war in 1946. But, I mean, she had a pretty eventful war herself.
Yes, indeed she did. And I think that must have been quite typical of so many who were, serving at that time, or certainly in, throughout the world, but certainly in Great Britain.
Yeah, I think there might be a podcast series in exploring what women did during various conflicts.
What a good idea.
Okay, RMC, you heard it here first.
Right, let's make it so.
Okay, so let's talk about Norma's husband, or late husband, David, whom she met during the war and got married to after the war in 1946. And David was, when she first met him, a CAM pilot, a catapult aircraft merchant ship pilot, CAM pilot. And I didn't really know much about these, so I did a bit of research. And in the early 40s, 41, 42, during the Battle of Atlantic, the air gap was huge. The air gap was the bits that aircraft based on either American or British Irish soil couldn't cover because they didn't have long enough range. And at the start of the war, it was about 1,500 miles. And we didn't have any or very many aircraft carriers then. We subsequently built lots, and they were then deployed as escort carriers. But in the early days, someone came up with the bright idea of putting a catapult on a merchant ship, putting a Hurricane, that's a small, like the Spitfire, small fighter plane, and launching it using rockets so that it took off. Now, there was no flight deck for the Hurricane to land, and so the Hurricane had to ditch, and the pilot had seconds to bail out before it sank. So they were knowingly being catapulted off a ship, a merchant ship, knowing that they have to ditch in the ocean in order to go and fly another plane.
So I'm no aviation expert, but I don't think a Hurricane was designed to land on water, let alone in the middle of the Atlantic, which I'm sure is not as flat as glass.
Well, I think it also, they weren't designed to be catapulted using rockets off a merchant ship either. And just for listeners' benefit, the reason they wanted to do this is that they wanted the Hurricanes to shoot down the sort of Focke-Wulf Condor aircraft. These were the German reconnaissance aircraft that would be circling above that air gap, and then sort of helping get the U-boats onto potential targets. So by shooting down the Focke-Wulfs, the U-boats lost their sort of aerial sort of intelligence. So that's why they did it.
And that's very important. It must have been quite exhilarating being launched off an aircraft off a ship by rockets, though.
Well, just to have a think about that, Steve. You're sitting in the cockpit of a Hurricane, a plane that's designed to take off and land on on land, knowing that your only way, it's a one-way journey, i.e. the plane is going to ditch at the end of it, and you've got to somehow bail out of it before the plane sinks. So imagine the bravery of people that do that. Norma also spoke about one instance where he was sitting in the cockpit waiting to that, and they hadn't pulled out the release pin, so that the rockets would have gone off, but the Hurricane wouldn't have taken off because it was still pinned in position. That they would have done that to stop it from falling off during ship roll, and it was only because the aircraft that they were going to intercept was found to be friendly that they didn't actually fire the rockets. Otherwise, David wouldn't have been around, or Norma, to tell this story.
Indeed, and apparently he wasn't a happy camper once he found that out either.
No, well, I don't think you would be if you knew that someone hadn't done their job. So the CAM pilots, and there were very, very few of them, and people know very little about them. They were probably the bravest of the brave, the fewest of the few. I mean, I can't imagine, who would want to do that voluntarily, but they did. They did volunteer for it. Anyway, what they managed to do after that was build escort carriers. These were proper aircraft carriers that would be part of an escort convoy, and they would carry a plane designed to take off and land on an aircraft carrier, the Swordfish, the most famous naval plane of World War II, and really sort of underappreciated, I think. They were terrific little biplanes, and could withstand all the shocks of taking off and landing on an aircraft carrier, and they were quite formidable as well. They were driven by very brave pilots as well, and once they had those in numbers, they had no need of the CAM pilots. So David retrained as a Swordfish pilot, so he could take off. So he started flying missions to cover that air gap, which was starting to reduce. Was 800 miles by 1943. So they were starting to reduce it. But the only way they could provide the air cover was from these escort carriers.
So David wrote a pamphlet, I think is the best way to describe it, kind of going into a bit more detail about this, which if listeners want to read, we will include a link in the description below. And it is worth reading for sure.
Yes, I think he was keen that people knew about the CAM pilots and their extraordinary feats of bravery. And Norma herself was, throughout your interview with her, the passion that she felt for what he did in that particular phase of the war was very real. And her son, Robin, reminded her that actually she almost single-handedly sort of got a memorial to the CAM pilots erected in Belfast, which was quite a centre to the CAM operations at the time. And she unveiled it. So she was obviously, she's very passionate about, making this story more widely available, and hopefully we'll do that through this podcast.
Absolutely. I mean, this is very much an untold story, isn't it? And we are talking a handful of pilots here. Yes,
a real handful of pilots. It's worth also just mentioning that he actually wrote or co-wrote a song called the A25. Now, for listeners, the A25 that Norma mentioned was a form that you had to fill in if you got any damage to your plane. It was probably a despised form because you probably had to fill it in. If you lose your plane, you don't really want to have to fill it in. And of course, for CAM pilots, they lost their plane every time they flew, and they still had to fill out this form. The A25. So he wrote this song called the A25. And if you Google A25 song, you can get it in its full glory. I think it's sort of cracking show, I'm alive, but I still have to render my A25 is the chorus line. It starts off, they say in the Air Force, a landing's okay if the pilot gets out and can still walk away. But in the Fleet Air Arm, the prospect is grim if the landing's piss poor and the pilot can't swim. I think it runs to many, many verses, and I think over the years it got added to and became a sort of Fleet Air sort of anthem, the A25 song. But I would encourage listeners to go and Google it and check it out.
Absolutely. He certainly had a sense of humour, didn't he?
I think you had to if you were going to launch off a merchant ship on a catapult fired by whatever number, 30 rockets or whatever it was. Yes. No, I'm absolutely fascinating. And Robin, he was obviously very proud of both his parents as well. And, and I think he's doing his bit to try and make sure that story is told as well. I think he gives talks. So it's just one of those episodes of World War II that we know very little about. And I'm really glad that this has surfaced.
Yeah, me too. And I think we can describe that as a proper family effort.
Yes, it is. A family deal.
Thank you ever so much, Mike.
You're very welcome.
Before you go, if you're a member of the Armed Forces community and need support with your mental health, Op Courage can help. Use the link in this podcast description for details. Or you can phone the Combat Stress Helpline on 0800 138 1619. If you'd like to contact us, email studio@companyofmakers.com.
Finally, we're giving a really big shout out to our funders, the Royal Navy and Royal Marines Charity. Thank you.